Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive, fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief.
Morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Rebecca. My heart, it's my season. Sunshine, blue skies, hotter than Hades. You and I have been having this conversation just about Colorado. We're just it's a chatty culture. The sun's shining. We want to say hi to everybody. We want to move and be outside and take advantage of the day, even though 160 days look like this. But I feel that call of summer. It's just my happy time. I feel really good and happy, and I love to be outdoors. But yesterday there was this hot wind, and that's always so unsettling. And we have fire alert all day today. And I can just feel tension in my body. Oh, it's just going to take one downed power line again. And so it's interesting. I can feel the pull of a rejoicing of my heart for the sunshine and the blue skies and being outdoors. And I can feel this unease every time that hot wind blows on me. That does not feel right. So it's such an odd juxtaposition for my heart to be in. My body really rejoices. My skin really likes the sun. I love that feeling. And I can feel it feels sad and scary. So my heart's carrying that this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
How is your heart this morning?
My heart this morning, I'm really excited that Andrea's show gets to come back out to people that maybe didn't get to see it at the Paramount, and that they're going to have this Red Rocks show. And I just delightfully learned that I have tickets, which is a sweet gift because I was not fighting a bunch of people. I was at the Paramount. It's okay. And now, I do get to go. So now I get to be excited about that. So my heart just feels giddy this morning.
It's going to be sweet. It's going to be. It's going to be fucking magical. Well, we have another Andrea Gibson lover and poet with us today who we've had on the show before. And we were talking about a thread that will come through today, but we're having Cheryl back in a different context for a different side of grief. So Cheryl Slover-Linett is a poet based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her poetry has been featured in Amethyst Review, Eunoia Review, River Mouth Review, Sky Island Journal, Foothill Poetry Journal, and Hole in the Head Review, among others. And she has served on the editorial teams at Terrain.org and High Desert Journal. She received her MFA from Western Colorado University and holds degrees from UCLA and Yale University. In addition to writing, she leads wilderness retreats that are amazing, everyone, through Lead Feather, the nature-based nonprofit she founded in 2008. She spends as much time as she can on the rivers and in the mountains of northern New Mexico. We'll link below to where you can find out more about Cheryl. But Cheryl, welcome back to All the Grief.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Rebecca. I'm so happy to be here again. Such a treat.
We're so delighted to see you again. How is your heart this morning?
My heart is so full of love. And I love that feeling, when you wake up. I don't always sleep well, but I still wake up and, oh my God, I'm grateful to be alive. And I didn't always have that sense every day of this, just such deep gratitude to have this body, to have the privilege of being alive. I think as I get older, I just sense the preciousness more.
Glad. Well, shining your beautiful grief heart. When you think back, the first time grief made itself known to you, what comes to mind?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And thanks for prepping me on it, because it was not an easy question. I'm not sure I have a single moment, but there were a few moments that led up to probably the one where there was that flip. When my mom first had her psychotic breaks when I was 9 and was institutionalized for a while and wasn't around. And that was just a very confusing time. I'd never seen my father cry before. My grandparents came to live with us. I kind of understood a little bit of what was going on, but certainly not the whole. So I think grief started to show there. The first time I was sexually assaulted, I have to, say that was also grief. And got me into maybe freeze mode. If you think
Yeah.
about kind of trauma response, like that was a freeze, which I think of being a big part of my grief story as I've tried to melt my
Mm.
frozen parts. But then the book of poetry, the longer poem in the book that the book is named after, is about my mom's best friend who became a sexual predator. He was a very trusted
Mm.
adult and was a
Mhm.
father, mother figure for me. And when he became a sexual predator for me, I think that was the switch that flipped,
Mm.
where it's like, what? No, this can't be happening.
Mm.
Okay, now I have no one, felt like.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, the switch, but it had these antecedents. My mother, she's passed, so I don't have to worry about her listening to this podcast. But that was a long, long grief journey for me with her. She wasn't there for me as a kid because of things that were beyond her control. But then the fact that she brought this man into our family who then was very, kind of broke a lot of things.
Yeah.
Mm, mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, these moments that even before we can name them as griefs that shape us. And it almost when a really big grief moment hits, it's like, oh, I recognize parts of this feel familiar. So, I mean, I almost want to start backwards. And I say backwards because it was the last thing you said. And it's also the last poem in the book, but the seduction of the daughter in 15 pieces. And so, talk to us just a little bit about that being a major part of your grief origin story. And also just a huge element of this book, this beautiful book of poems.
Yeah, thanks. It was a really hard poem to write. It took so
Mm,
many different forms. I ended up like at 57 deciding it would be a good idea to get an MFA in creative writing. I have
beautiful.
no idea where this came from,
Yay! No, I
but
love these are my
right?
favorite stories, yes.
It was definitely a what the fuck is happening here? But I did, and I fell in love with this Canadian poet, Anne Carson. She's so quirky. She doesn't do any interviews, any readings, anything. And I'm not even sure I know what she looks like, but I loved her poetry. It really spoke to me. And she wrote this book called The Beauty of the Husband, a fictional essay in 29 tangos. And that was so fanciful. Like 29 tangos. What? What does that mean? What is this going to be like? It was such an invitation into the story of this woman being married to this husband. And each one was like a little vignette.
Mm,
And sometimes they felt connected. Sometimes they didn't feel connected. There was a lot of grief in this story, but I think that the form also held the grief really well because you'd have these breaks and you're like left hanging and then you're brought in somewhere else entirely. Time was just not linear. And that felt a lot like, okay, this form might be able to hold this story. So I started writing it and it has 15 tangos or pieces or elements to it. And it took me maybe like a year to write the whole thing. I wrote some for a class on narrative poetry because technically it's a narrative poem, which is a longer form poem. But I really loved breaking it up and trying different forms within a form because some feel like a dolly painting to me where
mm,
you look at it or listen to it and I'm not really sure what's happening here. But
mm,
because my goal with it was to have there be enough pieces, if you put it all together, you can kind of see the shape of it or figure out what
mm,
happened. There's a
mm.
great quote that has really guided my writing by Emily Dickinson that says, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant."
Mm,
So that gives like permission for me, not necessarily like make up things, but like tell it in a different way or a different color or a different age or a different something or other. So you don't have to bear your soul in like telling every detail
mm,
or even like the details in the right order, but that you can create a picture that together people are going to understand what happened here. But I don't have to say everything because I think with trauma and with grief, you don't necessarily want to say everything. And I'll just be honest, I do not read that poem out
mm.
loud. I don't do it at
Mhm.
reading. I did it twice and it re-triggered me.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that about writing it too, because when we have to write about something traumatic, it can put us back in those states. I had an experience in graduate school because it's always fill your heart out, write your trauma. And no one was saying trauma's disorganizing. You're going to try to write about it and you're going to be lost in time. You're not going to know, it was really hard for me to write that part in just a paper for a professor to read. So how was that process for you writing about this traumatic experience?
It was hard. I had to write a lot of it out in nature to hold me, and I couldn't do that much at a time. And I would write it and then put it away for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then bring it back out and see what it looked like. And I had to try it in a lot of different ways and cry a lot. I think I actually haven't written since I graduated almost 3 years ago, and I had a lot of shame around that at first, and then I realized, no, I'm still in recovery from having done that. And you're right, nobody really tells you that this is going to be hard. And I think I went to a pretty supportive program, and even with that, it was hard. But coming into nature and titrating, and there was some other energy that I still don't really even know that helped me during this so that I could do it. I don't know that I have that energy still present. I don't know if it's the muse or an ancestor, or I all I can say is during that time, I was held in ways that I didn't know going in. I didn't know I was going to be writing about this stuff when I started the program. So I don't even know what to call that. But the grief, there was some way in which this story wanted to be told, either for me or for others, or probably both. And that somehow the grief was held. And maybe you guys have become experts on grief. So maybe maybe you know what the hell happened there, because I still don't.
No, I think we joke a lot. There's probably not such a thing as an expert of grief. We know a lot. We've gotten a lot of information and really great wisdom from people, and it feels impossible. And don't trust anyone who calls themselves an expert on grief, because it feels like an impossible thing. But all of that makes so much sense, I think, related to trauma and related to writing about trauma or even speaking it. And it's I think in the therapeutic relationship, have had clients where we work together for over a year on the resourcing part. What are the things, the nature, all the things that keep you in your body, keep you in the present moment, keep you feeling grounded. And then we're going to dip our toe in the water of this horrific experience. And then we're going to come right back. Like you said, the titrating, we'll come right back in and breathe and feel the ground and think of your dog and all the things that where we're like, right, I'm safe in the present, but you have to have those practices. And I think that's what can be hard about asking people to write things or journal things with this expectation, oh, you'll release it. Not if you're not trauma informed. Like, I guess I should write about this. I guess that's weird that I'm suddenly feeling completely depressed, or you asked me to do that, so I should be able to do it. And I found that even I was also in a very informed graduate program, and probably the writing prompt for the exercise didn't seem that triggering, but it included this traumatic piece and no one had said a thing. It was kind of in hindsight when I said, wow, I didn't realize this still impacted me. And I was really struggling to finish it. And then someone reflected, oh, that's trauma. And I was like, perhaps one should tell people, if you're going to write about a trauma, even if you think it's complete, have some resources around you, all of those things. So that makes a lot of sense. And I do feel curious as you did this, and it feels like you took really good care of yourself, and you still are. You're saying, yeah, I don't read that one. That's not one that I want to read anymore. Was there any piece of it that tended to your grief for you and that you found to be some sort of medicine for what you had experienced?
Yeah. Some of the beautiful things that came out of it was I decided to write poems that were based on voicemails that my mom had left me during like the last few months of her life. They're or even more than are in the book. I think there are 2 or 3 in the book and a couple more in the longer manuscript that I'm sending out now. And then I also made up a voicemail that I got from her 24 hours after her death. I brought in humor about the 10 jars of almond butter that we found in her closet. What? What was that? Why did you need 10 jars? So her answering that question. And then just some tender things that I wish that she would have said to me. And so that felt like both honoring her. She had such a hard journey herself that was full of grief that I get to starting to see ancestral trauma. I'm calling it unresolved burdens or unresolved struggles. Some of those unresolved struggles for her that I get to pick up and try to resolve in my lifetime. And that felt like a beautiful way to honor her soon after she had died.
Yeah. You said something when you were talking about that quote that you loved about changing the shape, so interpreting slant in a lot of different ways. And I loved that surprise of your poems that they just took up different shapes on the page. And it was curious and intriguing and held my interest. And it was fun. It made it, even if things were hard, it was fun. It brought me back to reading a Dr. Seuss book or something to my kids, like I'm stepping down the page. So it was very sweet. And I loved the voicemails from your mom. And you can just imagine the voice and whatever sort of mom figure comes into your mind, you can kind of imagine the voice with which they were left as a note for you. So I loved those.
And that makes me wonder, like, whether having the different forms on the page actually helps it be a more embodied experience for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
But your reflection back makes me think, which can help take in the harder content.
Yeah. There's something there. I wonder this about my friend Andrea Gibson, who was a poet and had all these books, but she's a spoken word poet. And so when I see her words written and they're very linear and it's all on the left-hand side and I read it, I don't even know if I'm reading this properly. And it doesn't grab me the way their work grabbed me on stage. And so when I was reading your poetry, this is how I always imagine Andrea's poetry being written. It was helpful because the one where I think it also was the voicemail to your mom from your mom, it was the 10 days before her death. And it was like a word, like kind of a space and then a piece, and then it kind of jumped over and I was like, oh, am I supposed to read down the left or do I go across? And then I was reading it. I can feel the rhythm of this voicemail, that I can feel an embodied sense of what that voicemail would feel like, I think. But it was something different was happening than if I was just straight up reading it or it was like all written out with perfect punctuation. It was an experience.
That's cool. Yeah. It's fun to play with and figure out like what form is going to work for each one, because her voice changed. Her voice 10 days before she died was really different from 10 weeks before she died, and she was all over the place. And so I wanted to find a form that felt like that when you read it.
Yeah.
Where are we?
Yeah. Or stumbling. You could imagine this one thought stumbling into the next. As you're reading it, you could feel that. So it's like I'm almost barely completing this thought before I'm sharing this next thought. So it was an embodied experience. And Rebecca and I have been talking a lot about, Andrea was definitely an advocate of the Maya Angelou school of thought that poems are meant to be vocalized. And I think I was really introduced to poetry through Vox Feminista, which were, a female poetry slam group here in Denver. And so that was my experience. My experience was hearing and feeling it come out of people and a rhythm to it that was just, it didn't matter if you didn't understand. And so to be able to feel that in your words was really inviting and enrapturing. Your poems just wrapped all around me in this really beautiful way, even though it was really tough. I mean, they weren't all happy, fun poems.
No. But I felt like there was a safety. And sometimes if I read something traumatic that someone experienced, I can feel that now I feel like I have bystander trauma, that I'm powerless and then you left me without solution and I don't feel safe and I'm sorry that I can't read it. But it felt really safe to read your work. It sort of reminds me of when they talk about with children, reading them a book is so different than them watching a movie because their imagination only goes as far as it can. So that way that you put information that was just enough that my imagination could go to, like you said, I think you can put the pieces together and maybe see the whole story, but you didn't tell the story in a way that was, let me offload my trauma so that now you feel traumatized and you have to hold it. It just felt really responsible. And I don't know if that was your intention. But let me give you just enough so you know something happened here and you have a pretty good idea of it, but I'm holding you in a certain safety, or that maybe there's a certain way that even your titrating is coming through in the writing of it. Like, I'm not going to overwhelm your system. There's more I could say. It could be overwhelming, and I'm not overwhelming my system, and I'm not overwhelming your system. And so I felt a lot of care. So it's safe for me to keep reading. I'm not nervous that I'm going to become overwhelmed by the content. And then I get to stay with you and stay in empathy and stay in care and love instead of the freeze, the flight. That's when we are not feeling safe. So I just really appreciated, and then maybe projecting the amount of care you took for your reader, but I felt cared for in your telling of your story.
Thank you so much. That is such a compliment, because it was present for me, but I also knew, at least in the first drafts, I'm writing for me. I'm not thinking of the reader. But then as I start to think about, oh, I'm pulling this together for a book or trying to send things out to get published, I did not want to cause anybody else more trauma. So I did go through it with the eye toward what's the least that I need to say here to tell all the truth?
Yeah.
And how do I do it with specificity so that it is fully my story, solely my story, but so that people can see themselves, if it's going to be helpful for them to see themselves, whether they're women or men who are survivors and who have had a similar experience, or somebody who hasn't, but maybe had heard of teachers who become predators, but didn't know how it happened. And so it turns out I was absolutely not even aware that there was going to be this whole group of men who had never really had to think about this, but had heard about teacher predator and were concerned for their own kids, but had no idea how this might happen. And I've had a lot of people that come and talk to me after the readings. So finding the path through there so that it is a safe thing to read. And I'll say, like, the first time I read this one, I was finishing up my program. I gave a content warning and told people what it would be about, and probably 6 or 8 people got up and left because they didn't want to possibly be triggered. And I just so support that and figuring out ways to do that and not be causing any more harm.
Yeah.
While hopefully doing good by having other people be able to see themselves, and also maybe having it be public service announcement for people who could be aware of how predators work in the world.
So you and I have talked often about, for as long as our lives have been so closely connected, and yet you and I took so long to actually meet, but our trajectories have been similar in so many ways. And so reading this, I felt even more. Cheryl and I have this shitty shared past. Not one that I would have been like, of all of them, I'm so glad we share this one. And I'm curious, one of the griefs I felt reading the book, I think that touched my grief, was wanting my mom to be my protector, wanting my mom to be something else for me. And she wasn't. And I feel there were moments I read that in yours, and God, I know that heartache. I'm still in that heartache because my mom is still alive. I also don't worry about her listening to this podcast. She's not. But it's not something she has been able to reconcile, is her inability to have protected me when I needed it and when she could have. And so I carry this. I mean, it's a grief I wrestle with every day. So I'm just curious, you had a grief of your mom's mental health and her not being able to sometimes be present and be a mom in that way. And then these moments where she could have been maybe a protector, and the grief of wrestling, especially as a mom, and you're a mom to girls. I'm just curious about that thread of grief, and maybe it's all mine, but I'm curious about that thread.
Yeah, I think it really brought up the mother wound for me writing these poems, just realizing how much that was part of it. It's like, yeah, there's the sexual violence that lives in my body still that I've had to work with, but then just realizing, yeah, as my kids got to be teenagers and older, there are so many ways that we as moms can work to protect our best. Of course, it's not 100%. But boy, the many places that my mom fell down on the job, and my
Yeah.
dad too. And my dad is
Yeah.
alive, and I did have the opportunity. So this is hard. This was a hard part of having the book come out. I could have sworn I told him about the teacher predator, and it turns out somehow either he blocked it out or I forgot. I told him about being sexually assaulted by the high schooler,
Yeah.
but didn't tell him about the man who he let into our house. I think I was
Mm.
hoping to dodge that bullet, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
it turned out to be a really healing thing for us. And I think maybe we couldn't have done that until I was 60 and he was 92.
My
Mhm.
goodness.
I mean, honestly,
Mhm.
my mom died when she was 80. Maybe an extra 10 years was what I needed with him to be able to have both of us get to the point where we could
Mhm.
come to it from at a really loving place and me be able to say, it sucked that you guys didn't protect me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I can't believe that you really fell down on the job here by not being aware.
Yeah.
And he heard it. And
Mhm.
it wasn't a perfect response, but for me to be able to say that to him and
Mhm.
have him hear it and have his wife, my stepmother, hear it and be able to support him in hearing it was incredibly healing.
Mm.
So I didn't get to do it with my mom, but I did
Mhm.
get to do it with my dad. And
Yeah.
that was a big part of the grief of I didn't even know I was carrying that grief around my mom.
Yeah. I think I didn't for a long time either,
Yeah.
and had done a lot of traditional therapy work around my own sexual abuse and my own past, but that had never been part of it. It was really about my own internal responses and reactions and shame and guilt and all these things that existed inside of me. And it was on a wilderness retreat with Cheryl and then all by myself in Canyon de Chelly for 24 hours. I thought I was going there to work on forgiving my male ancestors. And it was, oh, girl, here we go. You got a big mother wound. And so in the year and a half since then, it's just been, oh, wow. And so, yeah, so that was just, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful way to sense it and see and not feel so alone in it. It's okay that I expected more of her. That's okay. It's
Yes.
okay
Yeah.
that I do think that my childhood could have been different. I'm pretty certain that could have taken a different turn. So I could see myself in it in such a tender way. I didn't have to put the book down. It wasn't,
Mhm.
okay, I'm just going to have to say I read these all. Really? I mean, sometimes we read some grief books and it's hard, it can be
Yes.
hard, but I didn't feel that way. I just could feel tender. So anyway, it was devastatingly beautiful.
Mm. Mhm.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to apologize for having brought you into the wilderness to face your mother wound.
Please
I
don't.
do feel like I mean, we just never know where this stuff is going
Yeah.
to take us. And you were so brave.
It's
I really,
And it will be one of the most pivotal. I was listening to my husband has a podcast and I was listening to it yesterday. He was talking to someone and they were talking about cairns. And so the stones that are markers on a hiking path. And they were talking about these milestone cairns in our life and Canyon de Chelly. I have multiple stones there and our wilderness retreat is one of them. And it's probably is upside down. I had a little one to prep me and then a big, huge one when I went with you. So it was explosive in the way of very momentous for me, spiritually, emotionally, even bravery wise. I was sleeping outside all by myself. But it was also just one of those milestone markers in my life that I will always have that.
yes.
So you should all go on one.
Try with the canyon. The canyon holds it all.
Yeah. So I am so grateful. It was beautiful.
Well, thanks so much for being there with me and being courageous and sharing your story with all of us because we were all touched
Yeah.
really deeply.
It's my little family. I love you all. You are one of my families. Well, I'd love to invite you to read a poem now that we're more than halfway through this interview. We've sort of wound our way through several of the stories that you share in your collection. So I want to invite you to which one is calling to you to read to us and our listeners.
Thank you. I would love to. So I'm going to read Glastonbury Guzzle. And this was one of Andrea's favorites, and she hasn't told me why yet. So I look forward to hearing that afterwards. It's a Persian poem, poetic form. And the ghazal, it's hundreds and hundreds of years old. And the idea is it's a bunch of loosely connected two-line stanzas, and each stanza ends with the same words. And I didn't follow it exactly, but every stanza ends in the word Glastonbury, which is the town where I was raised and lived from 5 to 18. It's a town in Connecticut, and I'll just read the poem and we can talk about it a little bit afterwards. So, Glastonbury Guzzle. The schools are excellent, a friend says in Glastonbury, a code heard often about towns like Glastonbury. When I was 2, my parents left the Dene with mixed feelings and full station wagon for work in Glastonbury. Like a bee lured through a pink lady slipper's slit, I lie for hours after school in backyard fairyland, Glastonbury. Fleeing the crown in 1620, my ancestors set sail, soon occupied grounds near New Glastonbury. Between battles, George Washington's men resupplied gunpowder from the widow at Stocking's Mill, Glastonbury. Allie and CJ and Bonnie and I played Capture the Flag in the quiet of Natchog Drive, Glastonbury. Nawbach, Nyag, Wongok lost their land in trade for 12 yards of cloth, afterbirth of Glastonbury. 3 Jews, 2 blacks, the rest of us white Christians in my class of 400, high school, Glastonbury. I fumbled at sports, but sophomore year threw discus and javelin for the Tomahawks of Glastonbury. Isaac Sellover arrived from Holland, seated an E in New Amsterdam, and settled close to Glastonbury. Berry farms, apple orchards, peach trees, all raised for a crop of McMansions, a grander Glastonbury. I was raped after a meet by a shot putter pitted against my teammates in blue and white, the young men of Glastonbury. Once, my dying mother and I strolled the Connecticut River, spotting birds of prey on the edge of Glastonbury. Not golden forsythia, not lush woods, not even the crackle of autumn leaves tempts me back to Glastonbury. When asked where I'm from, I say Fort Defiance, or the East Coast, or Santa Fe, or Mother Earth, but rarely Glastonbury.
Thank you.
No, thanks for bringing that one in, because I haven't read that one in a while.
I loved I like the little history lessons or the English lessons or whatever they are, poet lessons about different poetry types. I loved the Glastonbury repetition. It just gave me this little anchor that kept pulling me through the poem. So I loved that and knowing why. It's so interesting for me why it resonated in my soul. See, me and Cheryl were meant to be soul sisters forever and ever. My parents moved us from Denver to this farming town called Loveland, about an hour north of Denver. And I think for my parents, it was really a step up. It was, we're going to move them to this place of better schools, of blah, blah, blah. And I was one of the brown kids in a school full of white people. And all it represents to me is trauma, all kinds of different trauma. That is all that town represents to me. I hate everything about it. I didn't like going to visit my parents. They lived there until my dad died a year after my mom finally sold the house. And I think she would have stayed had she had more friends in the town. So there was something that they really loved. And I think my brother had a really different experience of it. But for me, it was just trauma. I hated it. I hate the town. If I never have to go there again, I'd be happy. But my nephew moved there. And so there's still these little anchors. And I'm like, I don't want this fucking place. Let me go. But this last line where I'm asked where I'm from, it would never be on the list. I would never say I am from there. There is nothing that bloomed for me there that makes me feel like a part of me is from there. I feel like I survived there despite trying to be ripped out of the ground. And I vowed to never go back, and I don't go back. And so there was just something where it was, I understand this. I understand there is this allure to why it's a better place, and there's this idea of it, and that idea lives in other people. But my reality of it was traumatic. And so I just really, I felt that. I felt it.
Wow.
I also loved the history in it. I loved you talking about how it came to be. I rolled my eyes at the tomahawks of Glastonbury after you had talked about what happened, the opposing high school. I didn't go to this high school, but they were the Loveland High School Indians or something, and they would do the crazy shit. And thank goodness, at least I was an Eagle. Not that I care, but I carry none of that. People have such nostalgia for high school. And I graduated when I was 16 because I could not get out of there fast enough. So I just loved bringing in underneath all of this, there is contradiction, and you felt that and experienced that. Loved it.
Yeah, I think it is a really powerful version of poem. It is also, I agree, interesting to hear the source of that. This is a form that you're following. But without knowing that, just in reading it, I was just like, wow, that's so good. I mean, similarly, just where I grew up, I hate revisiting. And I always hold this idea that everyone should move away from their hometown. But because I think it opened for me the feeling of not feeling stuck in those traumas, the relational traumas, the things that felt really hard about being there. And every time I go back, my mom doesn't even live in this main city that I grew up in. She lives in a side city now that's very nature-based. But I just get so tired. I just feel exhausted. And that's my nervous system going into collapse. There's a lot unprocessed. I do not enjoy this. But I'm curious for you. I mean, you said that there kind of was a story or something you wanted to say more about Glastonbury and maybe your experience of writing it. I just want to make space for you to talk about why you wanted to read this poem and what it means to you.
Well, I think the tapping into maybe 400 years of grief on that land.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Going back and doing some reckoning with my colonizer ancestors, who a lot of my ancestors came over in the 1600s, and some of them had been persecuted for their religions. And I don't know all their stories, but it remains that as a group, they colonized that land and took it from indigenous people. So really wanting to look at Glastonbury still as one of the most desirable towns in Connecticut, the best school system. And it makes me want to throw up because we're not looking at the whole and the stuff that happens there, whether it's like you experience, Andrea, and the racism and the sexual violence that I experience. And so what does having created trauma on that land 400 years, what does that do for our present day experience? And how is it that a lot of us are ignoring it, I guess? And I'm sure it's all over New England and all over the places that have been settled in our country. So it's not like Glastonbury special, but they like to think that they're special. And so I just wanted to round out the picture of this place that, as you said, like parents were trying to offer us the best possible childhood.
Yeah.
And I really get that. And that's probably true for so many parents, and other stuff comes in. And how do we hold it all? How do we hold the love that our parents had for us? How do we hold the trauma of the land? How do we hold our individual traumas, the ancestral traumas? And then what's still happening, this whole McMansion thing. I go back and the literal blueberry farms and apple orchards that are now little subdivisions because more and more people want in there.
I really appreciate like that entire connection because we're most of us like ignoring whatever it is, ignoring the history of our lands, ignoring the climate change, ignoring what the heat is doing to the pine trees. I don't know that everybody's walking around going, these pine trees look sad, even though if you spend a moment, you can feel it and see it and sense it. And so if we're ignoring the foundation of grief upon which we built our houses, quite literally, then how are we able to take in like the current dysfunction and grief. And I think that's the part that really stuck with me was we had moved to this place that was all these things, all these ways better, all these ways going to give us opportunity. And I think in my parents' inability to, or unwillingness to see it wasn't going to be perfect, they were unwilling and unable to see the trauma that we were going through. I think for me, it was just a lot more. It was a lot more body and physical. And so it was, can't even acknowledge this grief. How are we going to be able to deal with the dark sides of what's happening and help people through the current trauma that's happening on top of the trauma that we built, our McMansion? So I appreciate that. I think you could just plug in a different town there for other people. I also did not know we had a Glastonbury here. Cheryl lived in the UK for a second.
I know.
Yeah, for a moment.
Me
There's
too.
a Connecticut River. And then when I got to Tomahawks, I was like, they for sure don't name their high school mascots Tomahawks in England. So then I realized.
That's not a thing. Yeah.
So for anybody else who was not up to snuff on their East
I
Coast
know.
geography.
And I did not bring in the Glastonbury, England in a deep way. That should be like a whole other follow-on poem. Because what has happened there, I went there last year because I wanted to see what the connection was. And spirituality had just been so commoditized. It was sad. I could feel still like the Abbey and the history that had come through there, but, the 25 crystal shops and, all that just felt like a different kind of sadness and colonization. So it was weird.
Gosh, that's a whole other podcast we could do. Is there one more poem, Cheryl? Okay.
A short poem, and it kind of deals with a different kind of grief.
Okay, beautiful.
Mistletoe. I once believed in sweet berries to touch lips under, but in truth, the sprigs of parasite that mocks its host. In a twisted juniper in front of my home, the leech looks like cedar needles, but for color, more mustard than green. A tree doc tells me not to hope for full recovery, says saw off limbs near the infection. I keep pruning parts that don't look familiar, but it's hard to distinguish intruder from conifer. This question sticks to my skin. Where does self end and alien begin? How will I know exactly where to place the knife?
That says it all. I mean, there's a moment where I wish we could have call-ins because I don't have any questions. That's exactly, yes, period. Gosh, it provoked so much in me. The line that just took my breath away, I mean, there were several, but the first line that really took my breath away was, the tree doc tells me not to hope. And I was like, this tree doc does not know Cheryl then.
Get that patriarchy off this land.
Mm-hmm. You do not know. And I bet she's going to send us a picture of a thriving tree in her front yard. So that not to hope for a full recovery, and just thinking about that, either if you're thinking about climate, like get into a state of despair where I don't know, that will make a full recovery. And then I'm reminded of all these scientists I used to work with, and they'd just be sort of like, the Earth's going to find Andrea. You need to be worried about anything. It's us. And I'm worried about us and the orcas, though. And they were like, oh, yeah, the orcas. Yeah, it's going to be rough. So there is this idea of hope, but what does that hope look like? And what does a full recovery look like? And I can get into states of despair with climate change. And I'm married to he's so much more optimistic about things than I am. And where everything's going, and he's, no, this is going to save us. That's going to save us. So just this moment of a full recovery, and what does a full recovery mean? And what does it mean to hope for a full recovery? And we live in our land of pine beetle kill and watching our forests sort of just rot away. And that's of our own creation, really. What's happening is because of the way we've managed forests. And so is that it thriving? Is that it finding its own way to health? I don't know. It really messed with my head. Do I hate the parasite or do I not? In not doing anything, I'm doing something. But in doing something, I'm also trying to continually human intervene. And nature, I don't know. It brought up a lot for me, Cheryl.
I love this. I feel like, wow, I had such a different experience. I mean, not dramatic I can feel that piece of it. But this is what I love about poetry, that we bring ourselves to it and it doesn't tell us how to think or feel. It just gives us just enough information. And that's what I love about music too, where I'm like, I feel like we had the exact same experience, but actually we didn't. But you say enough. And in it, for me, what's really interesting is my relationship to mistletoe. I had mistletoe therapy when I had cancer. And so there's a way that they'll look at how does a thing mimic a thing that's happening in the body? And then that is the medicine for it. And so the mistletoe kind of grows outward the way a cancer grows. And you're talking about it's a parasite. And so then you do this mistletoe therapy, but you give yourself injections of mistletoe in whatever amount is the least amount that causes a inflammation response. So basically it wakes up the immune system, and that's one of the problems in cancer. But as I was reading it, I was remembering my cancer experience in this way of relating to mistletoe and these ideas of even cancer, like what parts are me, what parts are cancer, what am I potentially damaging in a treatment. You get radiation. I mean, my lungs are 70% capacity for the rest of my life because it was between my lungs. And so I just felt one of those big, it's like there's the local of just like, oh my gosh, this tree and this thing that we're having to go through. And then there's like the global of how many ways do we encounter this question of what's me? Where do I begin? Where do I end? What am I cutting out? What's part of me? Where do I put the knife? In anything that we do. And so I loved hearing your piece, Andrea. And yes, those are good questions. And then I walked away with another set of questions, but that's good poetry. That's good writing.
That's beautiful writing.
So,
yes.
Well done. Yeah. And for you, Cheryl, is there a way that telling this within the context of this memoir was also a piece of your story and the story of this tree?
Well, it was also a story of me being pissed off at the tree doc. You know, who is he to come in and say, don't hope for full recovery?
Yes.
And kind of have some expertise around it. It happened as I was writing a lot of the other poems about the sexual violence, and I was just having none of that. I'm the expert. I know. I just was pissed. That's kind of where it was for me, both about the climate change. Can I save this tree? And then what it meant for me. Where does hope live in me? And what needs to be excised? And Rebecca, that's completely fascinating. I had no idea that was part of a cancer treatment.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings in a whole other.
It's a little on the alternative side, but but it's effective. Yeah. It's fascinating. That was such an education for me. And I did conventional treatment as well, but I was like, I'm doing everything. And this doctor, he was what's called, it's anthroposophic, which is a mouthful, but I got used to saying it. He was just explaining to me this idea of, he was like, I bet you never got sick for most of your life. And I was like, out of it. I never got sick. And he said, most cancer patients have that story and what it's indicative of is you actually have a sleepy immune system. So it didn't fight those initial cells. People get little cancer cells and then the body knows to fight them and that they're foreign cells. But if you have a sleepy immune system, you're more prone to cancer. So you really just want to wake up your immune system so it can do its job. And I loved that. And so it makes me happy every time I get a cold because I go, my immune system, it works. It's awake. That was a really fascinating journey of learning. Mistletoe therapy it's a thing. Well, Cheryl, this has been so good. And so we like to end our podcast with some sort of grief reflection. And I was feeling into what felt true for me today, and I was thinking about writing in general, and I like to give writing prompts, journal prompts, where you'll end up taking it where you are, so it doesn't feel obvious that there's a direction. It could be one word. It could evoke a story. It could be something really beautiful and positive. It could be something really hard and struggling. It just can go kind of anywhere. So I like those kind of prompts. And this is really simple. First thought, best thought. What happens when I give you the prompt, my grief is, and I'll give us a minute and then I'll start with Andrea.
What came up for me, my grief is crystalline. It's a phantom quartz. It's this beautiful crystal that gives me so much perspective and is so beautiful, but has these ghosts in it that sometimes catch my attention and catch me off guard, or I didn't see that one and I look at it a different way. And I carry crystals in my pocket all the time. So it's something that is also always tucked in my pocket. And sometimes I forget, sometimes it feels heavy and you feel it banging against your leg while you walk. Sometimes I reach for it for comfort. Sometimes maybe it snags on me and I wish I didn't have it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andrea. How about you, Cheryl? My grief
is intertwined with hope, especially after this conversation, talking about hope so much too. And I think the hope was able to come in when I started to melt the freeze response that the grief had put me in. And that takes many years. And so you were talking about, Rebecca, just the titration and the grounding and everything to really be able to do the melting. But then with the melting, I can see that there's hope there. There's hope that didn't really get a chance to express itself. So Thank you for helping me see that today.
That's beautiful. Rebecca, my grief is...
The first thing that came to me just now was a beloved companion, which felt a little surprising, but I really treasure the moment that I shifted from not wanting grief to really recognizing it as such an essential part of my humanity. And it's not always pleasant, but I feel a lot of love and care and tenderness around my ability to grieve and my welcoming of grief. And so it feels like a beloved companion alongside other, maybe more fun emotions. But it's just nestled right in there. So that's what came up for me today.
I love it. I mean, my grief brought me you two closer and closer into my life. And so I'll be forever grateful for the way that it melted my heart too. So Thank you both. Cheryl, what a beautiful offering. And I look forward, you said you have a manuscript out of an even longer, perhaps, collection. So I look forward to seeing that and hearing you again grace us with these memories and words. And so thank you.
Thank you, guys. Such a complete delight to spend the hour talking about grief and investigating it together. It always amazes me. You hold it so beautifully and with so much love.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.